Hunger But Mainly Death Games authors. Good evening and welcome to Hunger Games Fireside Chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And is it okay if
This is not the death chat, by the way. Just
no.
So this is the Hunger Games chat. But for 15 minutes, we're gonna pretend that we're mainly death games and not the Hunger
right.
Games.
So are you guys okay
or
with
the younger games?
Yeah. So are you guys okay with your real names being put out there for our listeners?
Oh, yes. Just don't send any of the more rabid fans to our home address.
Okay, so these guys are John and Aaron. I actually don't think that I know your last names. Would you like to share your last names? It's up to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm John Owen.
And I'm Aaron Geary.
And you guys are former Harvard Lampooners, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We graduated in 2010.
Awesome. And so you guys were part of the team that wrote Nightlight, which is a really popular Twilight parody. I haven't read it just because I'm not really into Twilight, but so you guys already kind of have some notoriety, so to speak. For our listeners who are completely unfamiliar with the Hunger But Mainly Death Games, the website is at hungergamesparody.com, and I'm actually going to read a description of the book that is posted there as well as at amazon.com. The Hunger But Mainly Death Games by Bratness Everclean is the only parody brave enough to suggest that the Hunger Games was way more about death than food. Or at least this is what Bratness Everclean discovers when she short-sightedly volunteers for a teenage death tournament. But she soon realizes there are fates worse than death, like having to kiss her fellow competitor and lifelong stalker, Peeta Malarkey. So if you had to sort of summarize your parody in just a few sentences, what would you say?
I would say that it's sort of like what the Hunger Games would be like if one of us were in it, or someone from our. It's sort of like looking at the Hunger Games from a current perspective, because Katniss is sort of, I mean, she lives in a totally different world, and so we were just sort of thinking, like, what would it be like if we were horribly sent to the Hunger Games, and what would we think about that, and like what would we notice about living in the districts and in the capital, and so I think that would pretty much sum it up.
I have to butt in with a quick question because a couple of listeners in our chat room are wondering. They were saying instead of Bratness Everclean, would it have been more appropriate to name her Bratness Never Clean? What do you have to say to that?
Now that is such a good point.
Well, this is something that John and I debated for a while.
Why we did that.
That is a problem.
But it's a massive problem. But it's explained in the book.
Okay.
Yeah, because actually in the book, I read the first chapter because that's actually available at your website. If you're listening and want to check out the first chapter, you can find it at hungergamesparody.com. But, yeah, that sort of makes sense, it's sort of ironic because District 12 in your parody seems to be constructed entirely of garbage.
Oh, yes.
It's largely garbage, although Bratness's surname is kind of like an aspirational one, hence Everclean as opposed to Never Clean. I think that's what we were hitting on.
He's hoping that she could be. That's her. I just want you to know also, you may not have worried about the listeners getting your names, but President Snow, who is a very amusing and wonderful tweeter, is apparently now tracking you down because your name has been released. So just warning you, you may not get a great wish named Death Game trail. Anyway, Savanna, go on.
I also want to know what his name is in the parody. Yes.
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. What is President Snow's name in the parody?
President Satan Man.
Awesome.
That is pretty appropriate. So I'm assuming that you guys are big fans of the Hunger Games. when you first read it, did you instantly know that you wanted to write a parody since you were already part of the Twilight parody Nightlight? Or were you sort of fans first and then later on you thought, we really should write a spoof of this?
I think it was more the latter. We both read it separately and kind of came to the same conclusion separately. I remembered reading it and I got really ripped in. I was like, hey, this is really entertaining, really good. And I ended up reading all 3 books within a week, I think. So it's weirdly addicting. And then I think a few weeks later, I think John and I got in touch with each other and said, hey, we should parody this.
Yeah, and with Twilight, it was more we were sort of searching around for a popular book to parody. With the Hunger Games, it was more that we were trying to that having done a parody already, we eventually realized that it would be fun to do a parody of the Hunger Games, but we originally read it just to read it and not with an intention.
From what I understand too, the reason that you had time to read this while you were at Harvard was because Harvard doesn't have professors; it's just all TAs grading things, right? No, I'm just kidding. That's my Columbia background. I had to say something.
Who told you this?
That's because Columbia went 1-9 in football this year, and I need something to get back against the rest of the Ivy League. I'm just kidding. I actually think the world of Harvard. My dad's a Harvard Medical School graduate, so I'm definitely a fan of the Crimson. Don't worry.
I just want to point out for our listeners who might not know what the Harvard Lampoon is. It's basic, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically like a comedy magazine or journal that's published by a group of students at Harvard. Can you maybe clarify my shoddy description?
Yeah, it's a humor magazine that runs short humorous pieces, and then it will also do parodies of the school newspaper, parodies of books, parodies of magazines, and stuff like that.
And there have been some pretty notable lampooners in the past. I know that Conan O'Brien was part of the Harvard Lampoon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely sort of got a tradition of hilarious excellence going on. My last question for you is just something I'm personally curious about, and I always like to ask this to people who have co-authored a book. What was that process like? How do you go about co-authoring something like this, where you're really sort of pooling ideas and trying to figure out what's funny and what works and what doesn't?
It was a lot of mailing letters back and forth. We spent a lot on postage.
Yeah, we would go get those huge sort of 200 stamp rolls about every few days. Yeah.
Seriously, what about email?
There's a more efficient way of sending mail.
There are now.
What is email?
Las estás.
See, the problem with these guys is I can't tell if they're joking or not.
Okay, well, seriously, the main thing we did was we did a lot of work on Google Docs, and I would recommend that to everybody because you can chat while you write. And we just, so sometimes we would work on our own, sometimes together, and
that's cool.
And then we'd sort of throw it all in and chat while we revise together.
Awesome. Yeah, Google, I worship at the altar of Google Docs.
Pretty amazing.
It is.
We don't blame you.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful. Do any of our panelists have any questions for John and Aaron? And if you have any questions on Twitter or in the chat room, feel free to ask as well.
And then we're definitely going to also speak with about the Younger Games. Thank you so much for your patience, by the way.
No worries.
Thank you.
We will. So, to both, and we're sorry that you came on a little bit later.
It
was just really our trailer discussion. The trailer was so inspiring that we really can't
just trailed
keep track
on.
of time. Exactly.
well, that was very funny.
Exactly. I was trying to think of a retort.
Well, thank you so much for...
We'll just write another parody and come on next week.
Yay!
Yeah. No. No, exactly. The panel or anybody who wanted.
Yeah, any questions from anyone in the chat room, on Twitter, anywhere?
I have a comment.
Of course, there's. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I watched the book trailer that you guys did, and book trailers have this wonderful habit of being really campy, no matter what. Like, I've never seen a book trailer that's actually made me want to read a book. And your book trailer did that for me. I found it very amusing and wonderful. And, so spot on with the book trailer.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
And everyone, remember the website, if you want to see it, it's HungerGamesParody.com. So that's the place
and I know
to go,
there was
right?
a delay. There was a delay with the release. Do you know when that's coming out now?
It should be right now. It's up on Smashwords.com right now. You can just go there, and we also link to it in our Twitter account, which is @HungerGamesSpoof. But it should be on Amazon tomorrow. It's somewhere in between our computers and Amazon's computers right now, waiting to appear. But it should be there by tomorrow or even sooner.